Welcome back. Tonight we will be going over 5 terrifying ghost stories from the Mountain State. I really hope everyone has been enjoying the content on the channel. Thank you. Let's get started. 150 years ago, in an old homestead in Mount Harmony, near the town of Fairmont, lived a beautiful young woman named Mary. Every young man for miles wanted to court her. However, Mary only had eyes for a young handsome man named Tom Dixon. Their wedding day was set, along with a large cabin nearby. The couple was ideally happy. Many admirers of Mary were disappointed, one especially, being a man named Jack Wilson. As weeks passed, Wilson's hatred for Dixon festered. Wilson would stay in the woods for weeks at a time and soon became a wild, bearded man with manic eyes. While in Fairmont one day, Wilson saw Mary alone at the general store. Upon seeing this, Wilson took off running towards the Dixon farm in Mount Harmony. When Wilson arrived at the Dixon farm, he collected a scythe he stashed in the nearby woods. Jack Wilson was out for blood. Wilson began to sneak up behind Dixon as he worked in his fields. Dixon turned around just in time to see the wild man lift the scythe to strike because Dixon's dog started barking. Dixon took off running toward his house with Wilson hot on his tracks. Dixon ran as far as the old family well when he tripped over a tree root. Before Dixon could regain his footing, Jack Wilson was standing over him, scythe in hand. The two men struggled. Dixon was finally able to get the upper hand. Dixon took the scythe and decapitated Wilson. Wilson's head rolled into the old family well. Dixon dragged Wilson's body deep into the woods and buried him in a shallow grave. When Mary returned home from town, the well had been sealed off, and Dixon spoke of nothing. Weeks passed. The townsfolk figured Wilson packed up and left the area. Not long after, Tom and Mary Dixon sold the farm and moved out west, never to be heard from again. The locals thought this to be very strange due to the farm being in the Dixon family for generations. The new owner, a man named Salters, moved in shortly but only stayed for 2 weeks before leaving in the middle of the night. Salters told that once the sun went down, a voice could be heard calling out, "Where's my head?" And then another voice from deep down in the old well would reply, "Down here in the well." The other voice would then reply, "Where? I can't find the well." These conversations would continue until dawn every night. The same would happen for every new owner of the farm until no one could live there anymore. The farm has since been reclaimed by nature, but the old well still remains to this day. A husband and wife bought a new home in West Virginia. Although the locals warned them of strange happenings that occurred there, the couple were excited to own their first house. Before they moved in, the couple fixed up the home and cleaned because no one had lived there in years. While cleaning, the wife noticed a reddish stain in front of the coat closet in the downstairs hallway. After scrubbing for hours, she couldn't get the stain to come out, so she covered the spot with a rug and forgot about it. 2 weeks later, the couple spent their first night in their new home. Suddenly, both of them were awakened at 2:15 a.m. to the sound of a child running down the hall past their bedroom, down the stairs, and then to the hall closet. The coat closet door would then shake as if someone was banging on it. These events continued every night. One day at work, the husband was very tired and one of his coworkers took notice. He told his coworker about what had been happening in their new home, and the coworker told him that many years ago, a man murdered his young child in their house in front of the coat closet after chasing the child all throughout the house. The husband and wife moved the next day. Pleasant Hill is an area located in Doddridge County. There sits a very old church with a graveyard along the road. 100 years ago, when the church was new and very few were buried in the cemetery, a mound covered in thick brush sat across the road from the church. Legend goes, a man had been murdered while traveling on the road and was buried in the mound. The ghost of the traveler was also said to haunt the road. Late one night, a man was traveling by horse along the old road. when all of a sudden, his horse started to struggle as if he was carrying a heavy load. The man reached back behind him, and to his surprise he felt a leg. He quickly spun around, and what he saw haunted him for the rest of his days. Sitting on his mare with him was a headless figure dressed in 18th century clothing. He screamed. This frightened his horse, but he was still struggling under all the weight and could not run. Once they passed the old mound, the figure disappeared and the horse ran home. After this occurrence, the horse would never go down this road again. He would buck the rider off and gallop home. The legend is still alive to this day. The mound has been eroded away, but some have reported having a headless man sitting in their backseat, until they pass the old church. In 1850, John Gamble moved to Wetzel County. One fall, John had an abundant harvest. He loaded up his skiff and headed downstream to the nearby town of New Martinsville. After selling his goods, John headed back upstream towards home. John stopped by a local homestead owned by the Whiteman brothers to see if they had the $20 they owed him for a wagon. Also at the Whiteman homestead was a man named Leb Mercer, whom John owed $2 for a calf he bought. John asked Leb if he had change for a 5 because that was the smallest bill he had on him. Leb told him no, but was also very interested in how much money John had. After talking for a while, John said goodbye to the 3 men and headed home. The next day John was found robbed and murdered floating in the stream next to his skiff. Suspicion pointed to Leb Mercer, who was seen in New Martinsville, in wet clothing the night of John's death. No one could prove anything though. Weeks later, on Point Pleasant Ridge, there was a corn husking. Some of the young men who attended decided to each take a different route to see who could reach town the fastest. A young man named John Hindman decided to travel the route that is now Gamble's Run. As John Hindman walked the stream, a figure appeared in front of him. The figure called out to him and said, "I am John Gamble. I was killed by Leb Mercer. Take him in and have justice done." The figure then vanished. Hindman became so frightened by what he saw that he started running and did not stop till he reached town. He told his friends and a few others in town what he had seen. At first no one believed him, but Hindman was able to describe Gamble in stunning detail despite having never met the guy. Leb Mercer was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. However, he was later found not guilty after his lawyer convinced the jury that ghost evidence was insane. Leb Mercer soon moved 27 miles south to St. Mary's. He was reported to have acted strangely and muttered to himself till he passed. John Gamble's ghost is said to still haunt Gamble's Run, seeking justice for his death. Around 100 years ago, there lived a doctor by the name of Anderson. One night, he was awoken by banging on his door. He was the only doctor in the area, so he was accustomed to getting calls at all hours. He quickly dressed and headed downstairs. Glancing at his clock, Anderson noticed it was just past midnight. Anderson opened his door and was astonished to see a young girl, maybe 13, standing before him. She was a stranger to him, which was odd. He had come to know just about everyone in the 2 years he had lived here. She wore a blue coat and carried a white muff. She begged him to please help her mother. Anderson asked the little girl who her mother was, and she told him Mrs. Ballard. The little girl begged him to please hurry to the old Osler place and darted off up the road. Anderson quickly put on his sheepskin coat and headed to the barn for his horse. On his way to the old Osler place, he couldn't help but think of the bravery of the young girl. It was a long trip to his house from the old Osler place, and it was about 20 below. After about 2 hours, Anderson arrived at Mrs. Ballard's. He quickly hitched his horse and headed for the door. He knocked, but no one answered. He tried the door and it was unlocked, so he went on in. Laying in a bed was Mrs. Ballard, who looked very ill. Anderson checked her over and found that her pulse was very weak and she also had a high fever. He put more wood on the fire and got to work breaking the fever. After having medicine, Mrs. Ballard asked Anderson, "How did you know to come?" The doctor replied, "Your daughter came to my home to fetch me." Mrs. Ballard told him, "My daughter died from pneumonia 3 years ago." Anderson told her, "A young girl around 13 years old called me out of bed to come help you. She was dressed in a blue coat and white muff." The woman said it wasn't possible. Her daughter's blue coat and white muff were hanging in the closet, but she died 3 years ago. Doc Anderson walked over to the closet and pulled out the blue coat and white muff, trembling as he felt they were still cold and damp. Thank you for watching. Please be on the lookout for part 2.